So let's get started.
Peter B. Collins.
Peter B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, January 23rd, June 23rd, 2017. I've got a lot of news and lots of commentary to send your way today. And for our audio listeners on the podcast, we are once again live on Facebook video. And you can access that by just going to your Facebook app and inserting Peter B. Collins. I think it's also over there at Peter B. Collins Show. But I'm not able to do that to check that out because I'm here in front of the camera and some bright lights talking to you. My lead story today is lifted from my latest in-depth interview, which is going to be released to my subscribers a little bit later today, featuring two of the most courageous individuals who are fighting for our constitutional rights in the post-9/11 world. One is Tom Drake, Thomas Drake, the NSA whistleblower, who was prosecuted under the Espionage Act when he tried to blow the whistle on illegal activities at the NSA, and attorney Rocky Anderson. He's the former mayor of Salt Lake City. He was the mayor during the Winter Olympics, hosted by Salt Lake in 2002. He's also an activist who ran for president and earned my vote in 2012 as the presidential candidate of the Justice Party. Rocky is carrying a lawsuit to expose the Dragnet surveillance that the NSA installed in Salt Lake City before and during the 2002 Olympics. And Rocky, who was there, said that in all the discussions about security and the concerns just months after 9/11, nobody told him that they were going to be intercepting every email, every text message, every phone call in and out of Salt Lake City for the duration of the Olympic Games. And this violates our constitutional rights very clearly. The Fourth Amendment says that they require probable cause and a court order. And we know that neither was presented or proven. And Tom Drake has stuck his neck out again. He has signed on to a sworn declaration where he describes, as a senior manager at the NSA, what he witnessed after 9/11 and the field operation that was launched in Salt Lake City and that captured all communications in and out of the area at that time. Here's an excerpt from my conversation. This is Tom Drake speaking.
Peter B. Collins.
Oh, we already heard that.
It's important to note just briefly that I became aware within just a short time after 9/11 that the White House had authorized NSA to turn its extraordinary surveillance powers and point them within the United States of America, unleashing a program called Stellar Wind, and effectively turning the United States of America into the equivalent of a foreign nation for the purpose of blanket electronic surveillance, beginning with phone numbers, and then rapidly accelerating from there to include a lot of other data, email addresses, internet usage, financial information. In fact, Stellar Wind is an umbrella program under which a number of other programs existed and were formed later. And so that was the foundation. Because of the 9/11 failures, the excuse was we just need the data. And it doesn't matter where it is. And that under the power of the president, and this was argued in some memos and later disclosures, in secret, actually, interestingly enough, the justification that the president had inherent executive authority to do this under his Article 2 Commander-in-Chief powers. And so that was the foundation. I began to hear murmurs about this field op that was going to be used as sort of the first instantiation of Stellar Wind on an even larger scale, meaning that what I've called a golden opportunity to put everything that was available and essentially put a surveillance shield bubble, as it were, over the Salt Lake City venue.
So that's what occurred. Dragnet surveillance of an entire metropolitan area. There was no disclosure. Everyone within that zone was treated as a suspect. Your right to innocence before being proven guilty was considered quaint or unimportant. And your right to probable cause in a court order before that kind of surveillance could be conducted was just flushed away by the assertion of presidential power. And I really applaud Tom Drake and Rocky Anderson for continuing to fight for our constitutional rights. And in this new era of Trump, it is an even steeper uphill climb. But this is an important lawsuit, and you can follow the activity. I'm going to link to Rocky Anderson's website in the show file for this podcast and for the in-depth interview that I am releasing to my subscribers today. Another whistleblower, former CIA officer Jeffrey Sterling, who is serving a 3.5-year prison sentence in Colorado, he was convicted under the Espionage Act, and he was accused of spilling classified information to New York Times reporter James Risen. But in fact, his conviction rests simply on the metadata, that there were a few phone calls. And as I recall, it was a handful of phone calls, and the elapsed time on the phone calls was less than a couple of minutes, like the time it took to say, hey, I'll meet you at Starbucks. The government never proved that Sterling passed classified information to Risen, and Risen, of course, refused to testify as he should have. And Sterling remains in prison. He appealed his conviction. The Court of Appeals in Richmond yesterday dismissed one count but did not reduce his sentence. It's another travesty where the whistleblower is being held responsible for the bad actions of high-ranking officials and the government in general. There are a couple of big stories published today. One at the Washington Post about Obama's secret effort to punish Russia over what is described as Putin's election interference. And it's about magazine length, 37 pages long. It's a detailed insider narrative. It does actually name some of the officials who supplied information, but none of the sensitive information is sourced either to an individual or to a document. And so we still have no public evidence. But the assertions continue to mount, and this reads kind of like a spy novel, where we're told that in August last year, John Brennan sent secret envelopes to the White House for the attention of the president and only 3 other people. They were instructed to return the message as soon as they got it. And Obama issued orders to a quickly assembled team of people from the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA, and they began to dig into this. Now, as you know, I remain skeptical of the unproven narratives that have been put forward by Democratic Party leaders and by a whole slew of unnamed individuals, present and former members of the intelligence community. So we're drowning in these leaks. Now, I do find this narrative very interesting. There's a lot of new detail, but it still doesn't establish the fundamental facts. And it makes claims that Putin personally directed these operations and that the spooks found memos where he was giving direct instructions on how to conduct these leaks and what the goals were. And so I remain skeptical. I await the presentation of proof. I await the unmasking of the anonymous sources who have thrust this narrative upon us. And I still can be persuaded if you can show me evidence. But this narrative also opens up the Obama administration to all kinds of criticism and attacks, and Trump has already started. He's saying, hey, look, this happened under Obama. Why didn't they stop it? And that's pretty easy to say in hindsight. My question is, given what we're told that Obama, top intelligence officials, and top Democratic leaders knew, Why did they play it out the way they did? And we're told that Obama didn't want to be seen as interfering in the election. But if the election is being heisted by a foreign government, that's a greater, graver kind of interference. So all of this opens up more questions. It doesn't really answer the very critical and lingering questions that remain, and it provides more distraction for Trump and his allies to say, well, look, there was no collusion. They have essentially established a talking point now that is nothing more. But because the allegations are unproven, it's easy for them to make unproven claims in response. Now, I don't know if there was collusion between associates of Trump and Russian actors, but I haven't seen any proof. And until I do, I'm kind of stuck in this position. And I know it infuriates some of my listeners who think that, I should just accept that because mainstream media organs have declared that these things are true, that they are. But I'm a stickler for that thing called evidence. Now, I want to commend the New York Times today because they have come forward and labeled Donald J. Trump a compulsive liar and a very serious serial liar. Because what they've done is compiled a list of all of his false statements since he took office on January 20th. They say we have cataloged nearly every outright lie he has told publicly since taking the oath. And they talk about how, yes, they use the term lies, L-I-E-S. They don't use euphemisms like, deceptive, misleading, untrue. And it is quite a catalog. It covers what? I printed out 3 full pages here. Let me just run through the ones since June 1st, all right? He said China will be allowed to build hundreds of additional coal plants. This is under the Paris Accords. So we can't build the plants, but they can, according to this agreement. India will be allowed to double its coal production by 2020. The agreement doesn't allow or disallow building coal plants. Same day, he said, I've just returned from a trip overseas where we concluded nearly $350 billion of military and economic development for the United States, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs. Trump's figures are inflated and premature. June 4th, talking about the London attack. At least 7 dead and 48 wounded in terror attack, and Mayor of London says there is no reason to be alarmed. Well, he was lying about that because the mayor said the thing not to be alarmed about was having more police on the streets of London. Then there's the case on June 5th. The Justice Department should have stayed with the original travel ban, not the watered-down, politically correct version they submitted to the Supreme Court. And the Times, in parentheses, notes Trump signed this version of the travel ban, not the Justice Department. They may have drafted it, but he signed it. June 21st, again, the Paris Accords. They all say it's non-binding. Like hell it's non-binding. Well, it is. And the last recorded lie on June 21st. Right now, we are one of the highest taxed nations in the world. That is a lie he's repeated many times. So they even map out, and I want you to click on this. I've linked to it in the show file for the podcast. They say, look, we're using the word lie deliberately. Not every falsehood is deliberate on Trump's part, but it would be the height of naivete to imagine he is merely making honest mistakes. He is lying. They show that on his first 40 days in office, he told public lies or falsehoods every damn day. And new surveys show that 58% of the American people don't believe Trump. They think that he's a liar. Now, this item, I don't know if it qualifies as a lie, but he created the false possibility or prospect that he had recorded his conversations with former FBI Director James Comey. He used it to brush Comey back, to intimidate him before he went public and leaked to the New York Times his memoranda of conversations with Trump. So yesterday, Trump finally admitted he hasn't made any tapes, but he still leaves open the possibility that some unknown actor of the deep state is wiretapping his conversations. So you never know what's out there. That's his comment. But I didn't tape, and I don't have any tape, and I didn't tape. And, of course, he told that to the hard-hitting panel on Fox and Friends. Coming up on the half hour, I'm going to be opening up the phone lines here at the Peter B. Collins podcast and taking your calls. And you can talk about anything, including the topics that I'm covering in the podcast today. But my lead question for most of my listeners is, do you believe that it's time for Nancy Pelosi to step down as the Democratic leader of the House? And I'm not linking it directly to the expensive loss in Georgia on Tuesday. I have been calling for Nancy Pelosi to step down and make room for a new group of leaders, younger and hopefully more progressive. Nancy herself is fairly progressive, but as the leader, she has enabled a lot of things that you cannot call progressive. So I want to get your comments on that. We'll be taking your calls in just about 15 minutes. And if you want to grab a line, the number's up on the screen there on my little card. You can call in at 415-455-0102. That's 415-455-0102. I want to recommend a couple of articles that you should be reading when you have a chance related to the ongoing conflict in Syria. And Gareth Porter, who chronicled the Vietnam War, he just celebrated a birthday that has a 7 in front of it. He is a historian and reporter who's done a great job. And in a piece published unusually for him at the American Conservative, he describes how the U.S. ended up supplying arms that wound up in the hands of al-Qaeda-related groups in Syria. He talks about the rat line from Libya, from Benghazi, Libya, where arms from the Gaddafi armory were shipped to selected fighters. At the time, we called them moderates in Syria. And it's a lengthy piece. I encourage you to read it. There's a lot of detail here that shows the collusion between the United States, the Saudis, the Qataris, that's the nation of Qatar with a Q, and also Turkey, and how Qatar and the Saudis paid for arms that were ultimately, in many cases, delivered by the Turks. And while this does not provide any evidence that supports Trump's reckless claim that Obama and Hillary invented the Islamic State, it shows how we basically lowered the priority of dealing with al-Qaeda in order to try to oust Assad first from the leadership in Damascus. And then when the Islamic State took territory in Iraq and Syria, we tried to use these rebel groups to also fight the Islamic State. And so it really, I think, details in a stark way how U.S. policy has failed in Syria. And we have become part of, forgive my language, but I'm allowed to say this online and on Facebook, it's a clusterfuck. And trying to extract ourselves from it, assuming that there is a victory at some point over the Islamic State, still leaves the Assad government, which we call a regime in order to marginalize or diminish it, leaves them in power with the backing of Russia. And so I think this is a very significant piece of reporting, and I hope you'll add it to your reading list. He opens and closes with a description of Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard of Hawaii's legislation to explicitly ban the transfer of American arms to terrorists in Syria, including the Nusras, the Al-Qaedas, and the Islamic Staters. Also, there are two very different media outlets that have published pieces about the war in Syria, and they use the term sleepwalking into global confrontation. The first I have here is from Reese Ehrlich. He's an independent journalist who has been interviewed on this podcast several times. He's an expert about the Middle East. He's written books on Iraq and on Iran. And he describes, based on a quote from Juan Cole, the history professor at the University of Michigan, Cole is quoted as saying, the air war escalation by the U.S. recently is extremely dangerous, and that the U.S. is sleepwalking into a global confrontation. Now, this is something that I articulated earlier this week in a news and comment podcast that one of my fears that I've articulated for a couple of years now is that we are going to see a world war develop out of the civil war in Syria. The other article is from the New York Times that quotes the Middle East expert Vali Nasser from Johns Hopkins as saying, with each episode, we own more of the conflict in Syria without articulating a strategy. We are sleepwalking into a much broader military mandate without saying what we plan to do afterward. And I don't know if Ambien is involved, but we got to stop this kind of sleepwalking. If you're on Facebook right now, you're watching the Peter B. Collins podcast as I record my news and comment daily free podcast. We're going to open up the phone lines in just 10 minutes or so to talk to you. Our lead question is whether you think Nancy Pelosi should step down as Democratic leader of the House. And if you are watching right now, please share the video on your Facebook page or your Facebook timeline, and hopefully more people will join in and be able to call in and participate. The number to call is 415-455-0102. The Arab nations that form the Gulf Cooperation Council, led by Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and also Egypt, have issued demands to the nation of Qatar. And this is the result of a split that surfaced a few weeks ago. And the lead demand is that Qatar shut down the news network Al Jazeera. Now, I don't think Al Jazeera is perfect. When they ran Al Jazeera America, they did some very interesting original reporting. But there's no question that the nation of Qatar uses Al Jazeera to advance its views. Saudi Arabia has media outlets, but the demand is that Qatar has to shut down Al Jazeera. We're learning that there are secret prisons with really grisly torture being conducted in the war-torn nation of Yemen. According to an Associated Press report today, some of these prisons even have what amount to human rotisseries. It's disgusting. They call it the grill. The victim is tied to a spit like a roast and spun in a circle of fire. Now, we're told these torture zones are being run by the United Arab Emirates with some support from their Yemeni partners. But we're also told that the U.S. sends our military interrogators to talk to some of these people at these black sites operated in Yemen. So far, the U.S. is denying any participation in that kind of torture, but I think we have to take that with some skepticism. Today, there is a new report published by Physicians for Human Rights. It's called Nuremberg Betrayed, and what it details is that U.S. torture practices under the Bush administration made an ugly a crossing, if you will. They crossed a line into human experimentation. And today I caught up with one of the co-authors of this new report from Physicians for Human Rights, Dr. Scott Allen. Here's what he had to say.
Over a period of time, and beginning as early as 2009, 2010, we started to wonder whether, in addition to being torture, there was a separate and important crime of unethical and potentially illegal human experimentation.
Now, some of these issues have been raised by the American Psychological Association. Some activists there objected to the participation of psychologists. And I believe that in a parallel manner, Physicians for Human Rights have criticized the use of medical doctors employed by the CIA participating in torture and keeping the subject of the torture alive so that they can, perform more torture on that person. That violates the fundamental Hippocratic Oath, if not other moral standards.
That's absolutely correct, and the danger always is that the presence of physicians and other health professionals, which sometimes is justified inappropriately as a means of keeping these techniques safe or mitigating harm is an entirely inappropriate role. In fact, it can be used to sort of whitewash such activities. But it's not only a violation of professional ethics, it's also a violation of rules, international rules that govern the roles of health professionals in detention settings.
Now, you get no argument from me. I fully agree, and I think that this is a serious question that needs to be fully investigated, and people need to be held accountable. But the Supreme Court this week, just in protecting Robert Mueller and other leaders for their approval of abusive detention standards for Muslim Americans after 9/11, it shows that the officials themselves appear to be beyond the reach of the law.
Well, there are two issues here, and one is the issue you raise of individual accountability of some of the officials, and that's certainly an area that concerns me. But I have to be honest, having followed this story for a great deal of time, I'm more concerned about the fact that the government performed poorly at a time when I think all of us who were concerned about the security of the United States would have expected government to perform very well. This is an issue not only of ethical and legal violations. This is an issue of bad science, really sloppy science, and ultimately a program that did not advance the interests of the United States.
And there's more to the interview. I'll hopefully release it on Monday in the News and Comment podcast. But we talked about the remarkable depositions that were published this week by the New York Times from the two consultants, Mitchell and Jessen. Their firm was paid $81 million to develop the torture program for the CIA, and their depositions are interesting. They essentially use a Nuremberg a Nuremberg excuse that I was just following orders. It's really pretty chilling. The Senate health care bill that was finally revealed from its secret origins yesterday is in trouble already. Nevada Senator Dean Heller has said he can't support it because it's too mean. And Rand Paul, along with Mike Lee of Utah and Ted Cruz of Texas, and also Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, they say they can't support it because it's not mean enough. And perhaps we're going to see this whole thing collapse. And the members of the House who voted for their draconian dismantling of Obamacare will be stuck with it, and Mitch McConnell will be stuck with this as well. They desperately want to essentially withdraw health care availability from millions of Americans in order to fund tax cuts for our wealthiest citizens, and it is a really disgusting transaction that is underway. The thing I want to underscore that I've been talking about, that I hope you'll share with people you know, people who get their health insurance because of their jobs. That's the vast majority of Americans. And the legislation that's passed the House and is now being considered in the Senate ends the employer mandate. Now, most people are going to hear, it ends the personal mandate. That means I won't get fined if I decide I don't want to buy health insurance. No, this is the employer mandate that requires that your employer, if you work full-time, provides you with subsidized or fully paid health insurance. This is on the line. And I don't know why. Here it is in the San Francisco Chronicle. It's spelled out in one of these explainer tables. It describes the employer mandate requires companies with 50 or more employees to provide health coverage to their workers and dependents to age 26 or pay a fee. The mandate would be eliminated. People should be screaming about this from the rooftops because the Republican plan doesn't just screw the people who recently got covered by Obamacare. It potentially screws everybody, except, of course, the elected officials who have excellent health insurance provided by you and me, the taxpayers. And here is a really retrograde bill that appears to be passing in Missouri and may get the governor's signature in the near future. It's called SB 5, and it imposed burdensome and unnecessary restriction on abortion providers, but it also opens the door to discrimination by employers and landlords. who could deny employment or housing to people because they say they've had an abortion, because they use contraception. Now, Missouri is famously the show me state. And now it appears it's show me your birth control pills and I'll take your job away or I'll take your apartment away. Now, some of the other elements of the law are part of the TRAP. These are the trap laws that chip away at abortion rights by making it costly, expensive, and imposing a lot of burdensome regulations. You know, those Republicans, they hate regulations except when they can advance their efforts to force you to adopt their moral standards. And when it comes to contraception, I mean, this is so idiotic. The idea that a landlord could kick you out because you're on the pill or because you're having sex and you're not married? I mean, I'm sorry, this is such a major intrusion in privacy rights. And the whole Roe versus Wade was embedded in the privacy rights of the Constitution. So this is really hysterical. And this is another case where a local jurisdiction passed a regulation to protect the privacy rights of individuals. And the state legislature, controlled by Republicans, attempts to override that. That's what happened in Charlotte and North Carolina. Charlotte passed an anti-discrimination law, including gender bathrooms, you know, that whole issue. And then the Republicans who control the governorship and the legislature intervened and bigfooted the city of Charlotte. Now, this kind of preemption is once again a tactic that is used by Republicans to impose their moral standards on the rest of us peasants. But when it comes to the rights of corporations, they're the first people out there to say, oh, we can't have all this regulation. These are job killers. No, you can't do that. The irrational nature of their arguments, I think, is quite apparent. And what about condoms? Are they going to penalize males who use condoms? And what about the transmission of sexual diseases? Is any effort to prevent that going to be running afoul of SB 5 in Missouri? I don't get it. So now I want to open up the phone lines here and hear from you. You can call into the Peter B. Collins podcast at 415-455-0102. Get on the line right now. There's no call screener, so if you call in, I'll either put you on hold or let the line ring until I can pick it up. 415-455-0102. Now, I'm a bit of an adventurer here, breaking new ground on Facebook Live. I haven't seen very many live video feeds where you can call in and talk to the talking head who you're looking at on your screen. So I hope you'll take advantage of this. The entire switchboard is open right now, and I'd like to hear from you at 415-455-0102. You can bring up any subject, but what I'd like your comment on is whether you think Nancy Pelosi should step down as the Democratic leader in the House. There are some good arguments to keep her, but I think, frankly, that the time has come for new leadership in the Democratic Party. 415-455-0102. I saw this item in the Washington Post. As of today, there is a new documentary available on Netflix, and it's called Nobody Speak: Trials of the Free Press. And as this is described, the producer is Brian Knappenberger. It looks worth watching. It takes two different cases where very wealthy individuals, billionaires in both cases, Peter Thiel and Sheldon Adelson, use their wealth and their power to shut down or take over media outlets that published things that they found unfriendly. In the case of Peter Thiel, it was Gawker. And he used the case, he wanted to get even with Gawker because Gawker had revealed that Peter Thiel is one of the few gay CEOs and billionaires in Silicon Valley. So, enraged by that, Thiel went after Gawker for its release of the Hulk Hogan sex tape And Peter Thiel didn't care about Hulk Hogan or Bubba the Love Sponge's wife or any of that sordid stuff. He just wanted leverage to shut down Gawker. And he structured the lawsuit in a way that Gawker's insurance companies couldn't pay any fines or settlements that were ordered by a court. Likewise, Sheldon Adelson, the billionaire casino owner and best friend of Israel based in Las Vegas, he didn't like what the Las Vegas Review-Journal was publishing about him and his funding of political campaigns, the fact that he is a suspect for bribery in China. So Sheldon Adelson secretly bought the newspaper through a shell company that he claimed he didn't own. But it was the investigative reporters at the newspaper he bought who were able to investigate and find out that, in fact, Sheldon Adelson was the real new owner of the Review-Journal. Most of those reporters and the top editors left after that was revealed. So I think this is going to be interesting. I'm going to try to watch it over the weekend. And I just want to note that this I got the tip on this from the Washington Post and columnist Alyssa Rosenberg. And the headline reads, "Billionaires want to enlist you in their secret plans to take down the press." Well, there's just a little bit of irony here, because Jeff Bezos is, in fact, the billionaire founder of Amazon, and he bought the Washington Post for about half of what the CIA paid Amazon for their cloud computing contract. Now, so far, billionaire Bezos has not taken down the Washington Post. He's taken it down many notches, but it's still publishing, and some of its reporters do a good job. But there is irony there, to be sure. All right, the phone lines are open, and I want to hear from you about Nancy Pelosi. 415-455-0102 is my number. Can you see that? 415-455-0102. You can call in right now. So Nancy Pelosi reacting to critical comments from fellow Democrats after the hugely expensive loss in Georgia of John Ossoff on Tuesday. She's on the defensive. And she held a news conference where she made some remarkable statements like, "I think I'm worth the trouble." She described herself as a master legislator. Now, as you may know, I've known Nancy Pelosi since she went to Congress from here in San Francisco in the 1980s. Full disclosure, I worked on her election campaign in 1996, got to know her fairly well, and it was just after that that she made her play to springboard into the leadership of the Democratic Party. How did she do it? She began spending lots of her spare time traveling the country raising money for Democratic members of Congress or challengers. And it is that fundraising that has secured her position as the leader of the Democrats in the House. Now, $25 million is what they dumped into the Georgia campaign that ended on Tuesday in a loss. Bernie Sanders showed that money is not the only necessary element for political victories. Nancy Pelosi hasn't gotten that message, even though personally she holds progressive positions. She came out of a machine Democratic family in Baltimore. Her dad was the mayor. His name was D'Alessandro. And so she has a very hard-nosed attitude toward the management of a political operation. And she brags about how last year she went around the country and raised more than anybody else. I think it's I don't have the figure in front of me, but it was over $100 million. But let's be honest, when Nancy Pelosi became Speaker of the House, it was because Rahm Emanuel recruited a bunch of conservative Democrats, blue dogs, many of them who could fund their own campaigns because they're so personally wealthy. And that didn't work out so well. Also, Pelosi's very cautious approach to impeachment for George W. Bush and her current reticence to talking about impeachment of Trump limit her appeal to at least some rank-and-file party members. And she has signaled repeatedly, just over the last 6 months or so, that she doesn't plan to change the party's message, to embrace a $15 minimum wage, to embrace single-payer health care, even though she used to support that. She believes that by continuing to send the message that we're the Democrats, we're not as bad as the Republicans, that somehow voters are going to turn around and say, oh, yeah, I'll vote for the Democrats because they're not as shitty as the Republicans. And in the long arc since Bill Clinton became president and embraced the Democratic Leadership Council and the corporate wing of the Democratic Party, we've seen the diminishing returns. Hillary lost. Hundreds of Democrats have lost at the state and federal level in the last few cycles. And I believe the Democratic Party needs new leadership. Our senior senator from California turns 84 today. And Dianne Feinstein claims that she's going to run for re-election next year. Dianne, give it a break. Give us a break. It's time for you to have some golden years and a little bit of retirement. Pelosi is 77. And so I'm not getting any calls right now, but that is my question for you. And I'll give you a couple of more minutes to get on the line here if you'd like to have a little discussion at 415-455-0102. That prompted a caller. Let's see who this is. Good afternoon. You're on the Peter B. Collins Show.
Hi, Peter B. This is Billy Cook. How are you?
Hey, Billy. I'm doing fine today. Thanks for calling.
You bet. Thanks for doing what you do.
Well, I have to. Otherwise, I'd be in therapy all the time.
Well, hey, on your topic of Nancy Pelosi, the answer is, of course, she has to go. You've listed myriad things, and I think you've left out quite a few things that come to mind.
Well, go ahead. Add your list.
The first thing I could think of is war crimes off the table when Obama became president. There was no better time to hold our government accountable for things that we've done wrong. And if we can't put war criminals in jail in this country, then that just paves the road for banksters to get away with ruining our economy. And it sets a terrible precedent for when we have people like Donald Trump in the presidency. So I thought she needed to go as soon as that came out of her mouth. Fast forward to this election loss, and her statement is that she thinks that the Democratic message is just fine and that people don't have an issue with it. And that just is mind-boggling and essentially the definition of political insanity. And, there's another couple of things that come to mind. I just can't think of them right now.
Yeah. Well, and we see, for example, many parallels in our daily life. When, the Cleveland Cavaliers are currently trying to figure out, why they lost the championship to the Warriors and what they need to do to compete in the next cycle. And, you can come up with many different examples of different entities or groups saying, hey, you were a good leader, you did a good job, but it's time for someone new. And when people cling to power, when their sell-by date has passed, the complications are real, and we end up paying the price for that.
Right. Well, and then it creates this the stigma that there's, this infighting stigma. Well, there's infighting because there's people that are clinging to power, like you said, rather than, stepping aside when, and she's already past her prime. I mean, she could have left when she had a good history and career, and we would have all thought very highly of her. And now there's this, and it's crazy.
Well, and the party leaders haven't gotten the message, partly because they've been distracted by this whole blame Russia scheme. And, we may end up finding facts and evidence that support these notions that have been advanced. But, when I look at Rachel Maddow and I hear all this hysteria about how, Russia attempted to hack into election sites and software companies, we still don't know the level of success that they did or did not achieve. But, there are obvious suspects right here in the United States. And the tone deafness of the Democratic leadership to the election gaming by Republicans through voter suppression, the cross-check list, tabulating, fraud. There are many different ways that our elections are being gamed by Americans. And maybe the Russians got in on the act as well. But let's start with the obvious suspects. And we don't even talk about that. Even in, the partisan quarters of MSDNC, you don't hear people saying, well, have we, done a lineup and looked at all of the possible suspects here? And I am still hung up on what Jill Stein's partial recount exposed in Detroit. Michigan went for Trump by a lousy 12,000 votes. And there were over 60,000 votes in the Detroit metro area, Wayne County, where people voted, but their ballots reflected no choice for president. Now, that may have happened a handful of times, but the odds, the actual statistical odds of that happening are astronomical. I mean, you and I could be hit by an asteroid sooner than this, kind of phenomenon could actually play out. But, all of this, they invested so much energy in Russia and sanctions, but they didn't use the mechanisms to block Trump from taking office at the Electoral College, at the Senate certification. And so we're left, as the pawns in this bizarre soap opera. And, it is this house of mirrors where it's pretty easy to get lost because we don't have any clear picture to start from. Billy?
Yeah, I don't.
Go ahead.
I
go ahead.
don't remember exactly what the circumstances were, but I believe it was out of this last election cycle. But I think there was like 14 red states, and 13 of them had exit polls that were completely off the charts and are, the historic from a historical perspective, that they're generally pretty accurate. But the only one that was accurate was from, I believe, West Virginia, which happened to have be under blue control. And so it's the tangible information is there, and it would be nice if we stopped talking about Russia, and began to talk about Chris Kobach and the interstate cross-check and just the delegitimizing of votes, which, in America's greatest democracy is criminal. So
now, Billy, what you were citing there, I think, is more accurately attributed to the Democratic primary, where the exit polls showed that Bernie Sanders won, yet the official tally showed Hillary Clinton as the victor. And that did occur in at least a dozen states. And it's never been explained. Nobody's had any particular interest beyond election integrity activists in digging into that. But, I think that the primary was gamed. What we saw was that on the Republican side, the exit polls tracked the official tally within 1 or 2 percentage points. But when it came to the Democratic side, the variance was as high as 11 or 12 points.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll have to try to dig up what I was referencing, but I'm not going to argue with what you're saying right now. It's oh gosh. Well, hey, Peter B., I want to thank you for what you do. I'll get off the line so somebody else can call. And I want to say I'll probably have to take on another subscription soon, and I encourage other people to do that.
Billy, tell us about your stepdad. Is that your conservative stepdad?
Oh, yeah, that's a great story. Well, you came up here and stumped for, I forget her, Susan Adams.
Right. She was running for Congress.
When she was running for Congress, and I got to meet you and actually tell you that story in person when you came up here. And thank you for mentioning why can't I think of his name now? The KGO, Tom Seaborn.
Oh,
and
yeah.
his recent injury, and highlighting that on your podcast the other day. That was really awesome. And, because of Tom Seaborn and KGOE here, and you being on the airwaves, basically, long story short, my stepfather used to listen to Michael Savage and the like, and one day I came over and was visiting with him, and I just told him to please turn his radio down because I can't stand the noise he listens to. And he said, well, no, you'll like this guy. Take it, just listen. And then it was you on the airwaves. So, and I'm sure he's actually listening right now because I just turned him on to your podcast. And
what's his name?
I'm sorry?
What is his name?
His name's Tony.
All right, Tony. Welcome. Nice to have you here. Thanks for being a PBC evangelist.
All right. Much love to you, Peter B. You have a good one. Happy Friday.
All right, and one last time, thanks for the Hamilton tickets, dude. That was a real treat.
Oh, man, I'm stoked you could use them. I ended up having 2 sets of dates. I couldn't go to that one, and I thought, why not hook a brother up rather than try to flip them online. So
all right. Well,
much love to you, buddy.
You're very generous. Thanks. And Tom Seaborn, who Billy mentioned, is out of the hospital. He's out of rehab. He's at home recovering from a broken neck. It could have been a fatal injury, and we are delighted that Tom has come through this, and we wish him a very quick recovery. There is a GoFundMe campaign for Tom Seaborn. If you want to help out, I would be delighted if you're able to do that. And as I wrap up today, I talked a little bit about torture, about the Physicians for Human Rights report, and I want to recommend this new graphic novel that has been put out by Nation Books, and it was produced by Sid Jacobson and Ernie Colon, and it is a graphic novel that depicts the torture report that was produced by the Intelligence Committee at the prodding of Senator Feinstein and then buried by the Obama White House in collusion with both Democratic and Republican leaders and John Brennan, the head of the CIA. And I think it's a great way to understand the story. I know graphic novels are very popular with people younger than me, and so I hope you'll take a look at this when you're at the bookstore and maybe pass it along to somebody who thinks, they were bad guys, tortures, it gets them to talk, it prevents the next terror, all that bullshit. You can set them straight with something that I think speaks to a younger audience. Thanks for joining me today for my News and Comment podcast and the Facebook Live video feed. I remain your humble host, Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds if we're together? Just sing a song